Welcome to Son of a Glitch. Join us as we explore some of the internet's craziest glitch stories. Story 1. I'll never forget October 7th, 2019. I know the exact date because it's burned into me the way scars stick on skin. It was a Monday evening, 5:46 p.m. to be precise, and I was driving home from work on I-35 with my Bluetooth headset in. My friend Clara called, or at least, that's what it looked like on my screen. Clara and I usually talk around that time, when we're both in traffic. She was on her way back from a shift at the hospital. Nothing unusual about it, just us griping about the usual. But that night something went wrong. She started telling me about a patient who'd given her trouble, and right in the middle of her sentence I heard the unmistakable click sound in my ear, like when someone hangs up or drops off. I glanced at my screen. Sure enough, the call timer stopped. Before I could even think about redialing, a text banner slid across the top of my phone. Call failed. I'll ring you back in a sec. So far, totally normal. Phones drop all the time on that stretch of highway. Here's where it got insane. 2 seconds later, Clara's voice picked up again in my ear. Not the ringtone, not a new call, but the same conversation continuing, as if nothing had dropped. Except she repeated herself. Same sentence. Same wording. Only this time her voice dragged just slightly, like a tape recording slowed half a beat. I tried to interrupt her. Clara? Did you just? She kept talking. Repeated the next line she'd said before the call dropped, only her tone shifted. The words were identical, but the emotion behind them wasn't. Like she was acting out a script of her own words. I stared at the call log on my dash screen. It showed no active call. My Bluetooth said, not connected. Yet her voice was in my ear, clear as daylight. Then the line went dead again. I pulled over at the next gas station because my heart was racing so fast I couldn't hold the wheel steady. I dialed Clara back. She answered right away, cheerful and distracted like nothing happened. Hey, sorry, she said. My phone dropped out just before I could finish. Where were we? I asked her. What do you mean? We were talking the whole time. You repeated yourself twice. She swore up and down she hadn't called back, hadn't repeated anything. She said she'd been staring at her phone waiting for a signal bar to come back. Her call log showed the original call, ended at 5:46. Nothing else. I checked mine. Same thing. Just one call. Except I know there was more. The creepiest part? During that strange second call, Clara mentioned something about her patient's husband being furious. She emphasized the husband's shoes, how they squeaked on the hospital floor. She had not said that detail before the call dropped. Later that night, when we spoke again, she told me that exact story in full. Word for word. So where did that preview come from? I went back through my phone records online later that week. The log showed a single 3-minute call, nothing else. No second connection, no half-minute blip, nothing. But I had heard her voice twice, 2 versions of it, 2 different cadences. Story 2. I live in a small town in northern Italy, tucked between hills and vineyards where nothing unusual ever happens, or at least, nothing that anyone talks about. But last year, in March of 2021, something happened to my sister Marissa that still makes her cry when she tries to explain it. Marissa works remotely for a design firm, so her schedule is flexible. Every day around noon, she drives over to our parents' place, just 10 minutes away, to take our family's dog Nero for a walk. It's been her ritual since the pandemic started. She leaves her laptop open, grabs Nero's leash, and takes him to the park down the street before heading back home. On this particular Tuesday, she walked into our parents' house, called for Nero, and got nothing but silence. The house felt wrong from the second she stepped inside. Where's Nero? She asked our mother. My mother frowned at her, genuinely puzzled. Who's Nero? Marissa laughed at first, thinking my mother was making some kind of weird joke. The dog. Our dog. Nero. The big mutt I've been walking every day for 2 years. My mother's expression only grew more confused. We don't have a dog, Marissa. Not since Bianca passed away. Bianca was our childhood dog, a little terrier that died when I was 17. That's when the panic set in. Marissa stormed through the house. No leash by the door. No food bowl by the kitchen. No basket in the laundry room. Every trace of Nero, the 80-pound black shepherd mix she had just seen that morning, was gone, like he had never existed. By then our father came home from grocery shopping, arms full of bags. She demanded to know if he'd taken Nero to the vet or to a friend's. He just stared at her, thinking she was making fun of him. We haven't had a dog in years, he said. The more she insisted, the more unsettled she became. My sister doesn't scare easily, she's rational to a fault. But she said there was something about the emptiness of the house that felt unbearable, like a piece of her memory was being sanded away. And then she noticed the television. The noon news was on, the volume low. A calm-voiced anchor spoke about the resolution of the pandemic and how this last measure will ensure stability. But the way Marissa remembers it, the anchor didn't sound urgent or triumphant, just strangely detached. The sentence trailed off mid-thought, leaving her with a chill she couldn't shake. She grabbed her phone and tried to call me. Over and over. 16 missed calls show up on my screen the next morning, all in a cluster. But that day my phone didn't ring once. She tried my work, too. Nobody answered, though I was on shift. She even dialed 2 of my closest friends, same result. It was like I didn't exist. That night she lay awake in bed, clutching her phone, convinced that if she called one of our cousins they would tell her the truth, that she had always been an only child. But she couldn't bring herself to hear it. So she cried herself to sleep. When she finally reached me the next morning, her voice was hoarse. "Where were you yesterday?" she demanded. "Why didn't you answer? Why did everyone act like you didn't exist?" I was stunned. I told her I hadn't seen her at all the day before. Our parents even called me around noon wondering if she was okay, because she hadn't shown up. In their version of the day, Nero had been walked by me. Me. Except I hadn't been there. That's when the stories clashed. In my timeline, everything was normal. In hers, Nero vanished, and I was erased. Marissa was so shaken she refused to bring it up again for weeks. She insisted she wasn't hallucinating, wasn't stressed, wasn't dreaming. She swore the feel of Nero's leash in her hand that morning was real, the way his nails clicked on the tiles, the tug on her wrist as he pulled toward the door. Too real to be imagined. And then the strangest part, the very next day Nero was back, sitting by the door wagging his tail like nothing happened. My mother scolded him for tracking in mud, my father slipped him scraps of cheese, everything perfectly ordinary. No one else remembered anything different. Marissa even checked her phone logs. The 16 missed calls had vanished. Only I have the screenshots she sent me that night, desperate, time-stamped proof of the calls. Proof that for her, the world blinked, and Nero and I were cut out of it. Story 3. This happened in 2018, and even though years have passed, I still can't explain it. My name is Mateo, and I've tried every rational angle, bad signal, a crossed line, some kind of misdial, but nothing makes sense. It's the one event in my life I can't shake. It was a Saturday afternoon. My dad, Aldo, had left before dawn to haul freight with his old delivery truck. He often drove through the mountains, so I wasn't expecting to hear from him until evening. I was home, lying on the couch with my phone in hand, watching random videos when the call came in. The screen said Dad. I answered immediately. "Hey Papa." At first, only static. Not the usual kind of crackle either, but a deep, wavering hum, almost like the sound of an untuned radio station. Then his voice came through, except it didn't sound exactly right. "Where are you?" he asked. His tone was flat, strange, as though he were both serious and distant at the same time. I laughed nervously. "I'm at home. Where else would I be?" "You're sure?" he pressed. "Yes, why?" The hum swelled, and the line cut dead. I stared at the screen. Call ended. Duration, 18 seconds. I tried calling him back, but it wouldn't connect. My texts hung unsent with that little red exclamation point. Fine, I thought, he's driving through the mountains. No service. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang. There he was, sweaty, dusty, still wearing his delivery uniform. I opened the door, already unnerved. "Papa, did you just call me?" I asked. He blinked, confused. "No. I had no signal. Not since I left town." I told him exactly what he'd said, asking where I was, pressing me if I was sure. He swore he hadn't touched his phone. We even pulled it out right there, scrolling through his call history. Nothing. Not a single outgoing or missed call. His log was clean. That should have been the end of it, but then he grew quiet. He rubbed the back of his neck and said something that chilled me. "I can't explain it," he said. "But while I was driving, I had this fear, like a certainty you weren't here anymore. Like I'd lost you somehow." He shook his head, embarrassed, and brushed it off. But the look in his eyes wasn't something I'd ever seen before. It was haunted. We both tried to forget it, but a few days later, I was scrolling through my own phone logs, and there it was, that call recorded, 18 seconds long. Dad's number. I can still see the timestamp. I even screenshotted it, afraid it might vanish like it never happened. That was when the unease really set in. Because whatever I heard, It wasn't just in my head. My phone registered it. It happened. The memory of his voice still bothers me. It was his voice, undeniably, but stretched thinner, heavier, like the weight of years was buried inside it. Not how he sounded that day, not how he ever sounded. More like a version of him calling from somewhere, or someone else. I've replayed the moment 1,000 times. Was it a warning? A check, as if to confirm I was still alive? Did he reach me from a place where something terrible had already happened? Sometimes late at night, I imagine what could have been. Maybe in some other version of that Saturday, I wasn't home. Maybe something happened to me, and his call came not from the road, but from the echo of that world, bleeding into ours. What unsettles me most is the timing. He showed up 10 minutes after the call ended, sweating and exhausted, as if he had been driving all day without a break. But the voice on the phone, it sounded like him, yet not him. As if it belonged to another Aldo, one that never made it home. I've told this story to only a handful of people. Most smile politely and suggest bad reception. But I saw the empty call log on his phone, and I have the saved call record on mine. It wasn't nothing. It was real. Even my father, who shrugs everything off, admits he can't explain it. Sometimes he jokes that maybe he'll call me again from the future, but he doesn't laugh when he says it. He says it like he's half afraid it might actually happen. Story 4. This happened back in 2016, and I still think about it every single time I step into an elevator. My name is Danilo, and I used to work the evening shift at a mid-sized insurance office in Dallas. The building wasn't fancy, just one of those squat concrete and glass rectangles built in the late 70s, with humming fluorescent lights and elevators that groaned like they were carrying the weight of every bad policy written in them. Normally, I always took the stairs. My desk was on the 3rd floor, and it became part of my routine to skip the elevator, get a tiny burst of energy, and have a few moments of quiet before plunging into the monotony of paperwork. The stairs never failed me, but one night, after returning from my late lunch break, I bumped into 2 of my coworkers in the lobby. Raphael and Nora. Both good people, both working the same shift as me. They waved me over and asked if I wanted to ride up with them. For once I thought, why not? The 3 of us walked into the elevator together. It smelled faintly metallic, like the coppery tang of old pennies. Raphael pressed the button for the 3rd floor. The doors slid shut with their usual sluggishness. The lift jolted once, then began its smooth climb. I remember the silence. Just the low hum of machinery and the faint whoosh of the cables. Then a soft ding. The light above the doors flashed 3, exactly where we wanted to go. Everything was normal. The doors opened. We stepped out, chatting casually, and headed down the corridor. It was familiar, gray carpet, beige walls, that stale recycled air you can only find in office buildings. But something didn't sit right. It was too quiet. Normally, you could hear phones ringing, keyboards clacking, or at least the buzz of the vending machine near the break room. But here nothing. We walked further, and then all 3 of us stopped dead. It wasn't the 3rd floor at all. It was the lobby. The exact same lobby we had just left. Same front desk. Same plants by the window. Same poster on the wall about wellness initiatives. And the strangest part, it wasn't like we'd gone back down. We never felt the elevator descend. It was a smooth, singular motion upward. Ding. Doors open. Step out. And yet, here we were back at the beginning. Raphael frowned. What the hell? Nora rubbed her arms like she had goosebumps. We definitely pressed 3. I saw it. We weren't imagining it. I could still feel the upward pull in my stomach from when the elevator moved. My body swore we had gone up. But my eyes told me we hadn't moved at all. We all exchanged looks, searching each other's faces for answers, but none of us had won. It didn't feel like a mechanical failure. It felt deliberate, like the building itself had decided not to let us leave. Nobody cracked a joke. Nobody tried to shrug it off. That silence hung between us, heavy, until finally Raphael said, "Stairs." And we all nodded like soldiers in agreement. We went back to the elevator doors. They stood open behind us, inviting, as if daring us to try again. None of us did. We turned and made for the stairwell. Every step of that climb, I felt like something was just behind us, just out of sight, laughing quietly at our confusion. When we reached the 3rd floor, everything was as it should be. Desks, chatter, the whir of printers. Normal. But it didn't erase the fact that for a moment, we had stepped into something that wasn't our 3rd floor, or our lobby either. Something had copied it. Story 5. My name is Lorenzo, and this happened about 3 years ago when I was living alone in a rented flat in Florence. It was one of those tiny one-bedroom places with a shower, so narrow you could barely raise your arms without hitting the tile. The bathroom was old but clean, white porcelain fixtures with hairline cracks, a curtain rod that sagged in the middle, and a drain cover that had never given me any problems. I still don't know why this one night stuck with me the way it did, but it's not an exaggeration to say that it shook my trust in reality. I had bought a fresh bar of soap that day, a big pale green block, brand new, smooth edges, still wrapped in thin paper when I pulled it out of the bag. I remember unwrapping it in the kitchen for some reason, don't ask me why, and running my thumb over the perfect, untouched surface. That sensory memory stays with me. The chalky drag of new soap, the faint clean scent of eucalyptus. Later that evening, after dinner, I stepped into the shower. The hot water fogged the mirror almost instantly. I unwrapped the soap, held it in my hand, felt the weight of it, solid, heavy. I reached for the shower caddy to place it down, and that's when it slipped. No big deal. Soap falls. It happens. But the sound never came. No thud against the tub, no clatter against the drain, no bounce against my foot. It was as if gravity simply forgot to exist for a second. I froze. My first thought was, it must have landed softly and slid somewhere. So I bent down, half blinded by steam, and searched. The tub was bare. The corners empty. The drain was covered by its standard metal grate, and the gaps were way too small for anything larger than a coin to pass through. I knew this because I'd once dropped a bobby pin, and it had taken 10 minutes of fishing to pull it back out. But the soap was gone. I crouched there in the water, baffled, running my hand over the slick porcelain, feeling along the rim of the drain, under the curtain, even out onto the tile floor. Nothing. I even stepped out of the shower dripping wet, scanning the bath mat, the sink, the toilet tank. No soap. The sensation that followed wasn't just confusion. It was dread, because I knew exactly what had happened. I had held that bar, it had slipped, and then it had ceased to exist in the span of a blink. I stayed in the shower for another 10 minutes, pretending it was fine, using leftover shampoo to wash instead. But my mind was racing. When I finally turned the water off, I searched again. This time methodically. I pulled the curtain aside, lifted the drain cover, stuck my fingers down into the pipe as far as I could. Nothing. Not even residue. The soap hadn't just gone. It hadn't been there at all. For days, I kept expecting it to reappear. Maybe on the floor, wedged behind the toilet, even back in the kitchen where I'd unwrapped it. But it never did. And then came the second part, the thing that made it all worse. 2 weeks later, I went to shower again. Same narrow cubicle, same cracked tiles. I grabbed the shampoo bottle from the caddy, and as I did, I noticed a faint discoloration on the porcelain shelf where the soap should have been. A perfect rectangular patch, slightly darker, like the ghost of the bar itself. I touched it. The surface felt rough, almost like burned ceramic. Not sticky, not soapy, just wrong. That patch lingered for months. Every time I saw it, I remembered that moment the soap slipped away. Friends laughed when I told them. You just dropped it and didn't notice, they said. It slid behind something. You were tired. But the bathroom was too small for that. There was nowhere for it to go. I even moved the sink cabinet, pulled up the bath mat, checked under the washing machine. No soap. The strangest thing is what my neighbor told me later. She was an older woman, lived across the hall. We bumped into each other in the stairwell one morning, and she must have noticed the bags under my eyes. I told her I hadn't been sleeping well, that I'd had something weird happen. She chuckled, but not in a mocking way. Strange things happen in that flat, she said. When I was young, the man who lived there swore he kept losing objects. Always small things, combs, cutlery, once even a shoe. They would disappear in front of him. He moved out because he couldn't take it. I laughed awkwardly, trying not to take her seriously. But deep down, I knew she'd touched on something I didn't want to believe. The bar of soap was just the start. Story 6. I live with my girlfriend, Eva, in a fairly ordinary condo complex outside Denver. We've been here for 3 years, and nothing about the place has ever felt unusual, until last winter, when something started happening that neither of us can explain. It started small. I came home from work one evening, dropped my keys on the counter, and headed straight to the bedroom to change. Eva was already there, brushing her hair in the mirror. That's when I saw it. Folded neatly on top of our dresser was a button-up shirt I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Eva's. It looked old, maybe from the 90s. A faded plaid, the kind of thing you'd picture on a grandpa at a cookout. The fabric was thin, worn in at the elbows, and it had a faint detergent smell, like it had just been washed. I picked it up and held it out to her. "Is this yours?" She gave me a look. "When's the last time you saw me wear that?" I laughed nervously, waiting for her to admit she'd picked it up at a thrift store or that it belonged to a relative. But she just shook her head. "Not mine, and definitely not yours." "Where'd it come from?" We checked the laundry basket. Empty. Checked the washer and dryer. Nothing. The shirt was just there. We tossed it into a bag to donate later. But a few days later, another item showed up. This time, it was a pair of beige slacks, neatly draped over the back of the couch. Again, not ours. Wrong size, wrong style, wrong everything. And that was the start of it. Every couple of weeks, a new piece would appear. Always clothing, always old man style, cardigans, polo shirts, trousers with pleats. None of them smelled dirty, but none of them smelled new either. They were just there, as if someone had left them for us. We checked with the building manager, thinking maybe laundry was getting swapped somehow, but our washer and dryer are in unit. No shared machines. No way for anyone else's clothes to mix with ours. I started keeping track. Dates, times, exact descriptions. In February, it was a brown cardigan with leather buttons. In March, a pair of wool socks, folded together, sitting in the middle of our bed. In April, a jacket with a cigarette burn in the pocket. We even installed a camera by the front door to see if anyone was coming in. For 2 months, nothing. Not a single unfamiliar face. And yet the clothes kept appearing. The weirdest moment happened one Sunday morning. Eva and I were drinking coffee when she reached for the remote on the coffee table and froze. Sitting right next to it was a flat cap. Tweed, old-fashioned, the kind a man in his 70s would wear to church. I swear to you, it hadn't been there when we sat down. 1 second the table was clear, the next second it wasn't. Eva whispered, "Did you see that?" We both stared at it like it was a live animal. She picked it up carefully, almost expecting it to vanish. But it was solid, warm to the touch, as though it had just come off someone's head. After that, the atmosphere in the condo shifted. Every creak, every hum of the refrigerator felt amplified, like someone else was living there with us. We did some digging. Turns out, our unit had been occupied for nearly 20 years by an older man before we moved in. He'd died, no family, no heirs, and the place sat empty for a year before we signed the lease. The neighbors remembered him. "Always in sweaters and caps," one woman said. "Nice enough guy, but lonely. Died in that very bedroom." That's when Eva started insisting the clothes weren't random. They were his. She even showed me one of the socks. There was a tiny stitched-in initial, barely visible. A letter, R. The man's name? Richard. I didn't want to believe it. I don't go in for ghost stories, but every time a new item appeared, I felt my stomach turn. It wasn't just the impossibility of it. It was the presentation. Everything was placed carefully. Folded, draped, positioned like it had been done intentionally. We tried getting rid of the pieces. Donated some, threw others in the trash. But the next time, something always came back. And worse, it started escalating. One night, I woke up to the sound of hangers clattering. I opened the closet door, and there, wedged between my jackets, was a gray overcoat I had never seen before. It smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. I wanted to scream. Eva came running and clutched my arm. She whispered, "We can't get rid of it anymore. It wants to stay." It's been months since then. The clothes still show up, less often now, but when they do, I don't even question it. The last was a pair of leather gloves, placed neatly on my nightstand while I slept. We keep them all in a trunk now, locked away, because Eva refuses to throw them out again. "It's worse when we do," she says. I don't know what to think. Are we being haunted by a lonely man who refuses to leave his wardrobe behind? Are we slipping between realities where his belongings still exist? Or are we just losing our minds? Story 7. This happened to me and my boyfriend last summer. We'd been living together for about a year in a small apartment in Portland. Nothing special about the place. Open-plan kitchen and living room, 2 bedrooms, 2nd floor of a 3-story walk-up. Our routines were normal too. We both worked during the day, cooked dinner together most nights, and argued occasionally about whose turn it was to do the dishes. One Saturday, we decided to bake a pizza from scratch. We rolled out dough, spread the sauce, layered on toppings, and slid it into the oven. Everything felt cozy and calm, music playing in the background, flour dust on the counters. Then about 20 minutes later, I went to pull the pizza out. I opened the drawer where we always kept our kitchen tools and reached for the metal tongs we used to lift things off the hot tray. Except they weren't there. At first, it didn't even register as strange. Things get misplaced. I rummaged through the drawer, shoving aside the ladle, the whisk, the wooden spoons. No tongs. I checked the dishwasher. Empty. I checked the drying rack. Nothing. Hey, I called to my boyfriend. Did you use the tongs? He came over, wiping his hands on a towel, and shook his head. Together, we began tearing the kitchen apart. Drawer after drawer. The oven itself. The countertop. Even the trash can. No tongs. What should have been a 30-second search turned into a frantic half-hour hunt. We opened every cupboard, pulled out pots and pans, checked under the fridge, behind the stove, under the couch cushions, even in the laundry basket. The more we looked, the more unsettled we became, because the tongs weren't just misplaced, they were gone. Finally, we gave up and used a spatula to wrestle the pizza onto the counter. We sat down to eat, but the mood was ruined. Both of us kept glancing toward the kitchen like the tongs might suddenly reveal themselves. After dinner, we searched again. Nothing. We both swore we'd used them just 2 nights earlier. They had to be in the apartment somewhere. But by midnight, we gave up, chalked it up to exhaustion, and went to bed. The next morning, I went to make coffee. Out of habit, I pulled open that same utensil drawer. And there they were. The tongs. Sitting right on top of everything else. In plain sight. Exactly where they should have been all along. I froze. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a step. I knew, we both knew, that drawer had been empty of tongs the night before. We had emptied it down to the crumbs in the corners. There was no way we both missed them. Eva, I called out to him, my voice shaking. Come here. He came over, saw what I was pointing at, and just went pale. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then he whispered, I looked in there at least 10 times last night. They weren't there. I nodded. I know. I looked too. We didn't touch them for a while. They just sat there, glinting in the morning light, like they were mocking us. Finally, I picked them up. They felt warm. Not hot, but faintly warm, as if they'd just been pulled from a sink of hot water. And the tips were slightly damp, like condensation. We didn't have an explanation. We still don't. For weeks afterward, we joked about it to lighten the mood. Careful, or the tongs might disappear again. But under the humor, there was a real fear. Because if an ordinary object could vanish and then return like that, what else could happen? We even considered setting up a camera in the kitchen, just to see if anything else went missing or reappeared. But in the end, we decided against it. I think both of us were scared of what we might actually capture. The strangest part? A week later, I scrolled through my phone gallery and found a photo I had taken mid-search that first night. I'd snapped a picture of the empty drawer, partly out of frustration, partly as a joke to send to my sister. In the photo, the drawer is clearly empty of tongs. Nothing on top. No shine of metal. Just wooden spoons and a ladle. That photo is proof. They weren't there. Story 8. This happened to me in 2020, and it's still one of the strangest experiences ever. I've driven the highways around the Bay Area hundreds of times, and I know exactly how long each stretch takes. Which is why this still doesn't make sense. I was living in Concord then, working in San Mateo. Normally, the drive down I-680 to San Francisco took me about an hour, sometimes more depending on traffic. That night, a Thursday, I left work around 6:15 p.m. and called my girlfriend as soon as I got on the highway. She was still at her place in Daly City, so we usually talked to kill time while I crawled through traffic. I remember being on 680 South, just outside Walnut Creek, chatting with her about dinner plans. Nothing strange. The last thing I remember clearly is telling her I'd probably be another 40 minutes. And then, I wasn't. I blinked, looked up at the green freeway signs, and realized I was on 280 North, heading straight into San Francisco. I was coming up on the Geneva exit. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 6:32 p.m. 17 minutes had passed. I should have still been near Danville, maybe Pleasanton if traffic had been light. But somehow, I was already in San Francisco, 45 miles away, after a drive that should have taken at least 40 minutes on its own. And that's not counting the time to cross the bridge. My girlfriend was still on the phone, talking casually. She hadn't noticed anything unusual. I interrupted her and asked, "Where am I right now?" She laughed. "On 680, obviously. You just said so." I told her to listen. I rolled down the window, let the noise of San Francisco traffic flood in, and described the streets I was seeing. She went silent for a long moment. "There's no way," she said finally. "We've only been talking 15 minutes. After that, the call dropped. I pulled off at the next exit, parked, and sat in stunned silence. I checked my phone's GPS history. According to Google Maps, I had traveled continuously from Concord to San Francisco with no jumps. But the route made no sense. The mileage lined up with a normal trip, but the time didn't. I checked my car's odometer next. The numbers hadn't jumped. It was as if I had driven normally, but in half the time. The weirdest part, my gas tank. I had filled up the night before. Normally, the trip would take about 1/8 of a tank. But when I parked, the gauge still read full. It was like the drive hadn't even happened. When I finally calmed down enough to drive again, I made it to my girlfriend's place in Daly City by 6:55. She checked her phone records later, and sure enough, the call log showed a single continuous call from 6:15 to 6:32. No gaps. No interruptions, except that I'd traveled 45 miles in that span. We tried to rationalize it for weeks. Maybe traffic was freakishly light, maybe I zoned out and forgot part of the trip. But that doesn't explain the gas tank. Doesn't explain the missing mileage. Doesn't explain how my girlfriend heard me on 680 while I was already rolling into the city.